We know that the factors influencing mental health are diverse, complex, and dynamically interrelated. Much of the current literature on UK student mental health uses relatively small-scale surveys. This approach is building a piecemeal understanding. The sector would really benefit from more comprehensive understanding of these complex factors to inform decision-making around where to direct resources to best support better student mental health. A comprehensive understanding of the interacting factors requires a large longitudinal study with diverse student representation. This is a highly resource-intensive exercise, and we hope at SMaRteN that we can support collaboration between multiple smaller projects to build a strong national picture. And we've invited Dr Broglia to join the SMaRteN leadership team to help us achieve this aim. Emma, it's great of you to join me this morning to have a chat about this. Can I just ask you to introduce yourself?
Hi, Nicola. Absolutely. And firstly, thank you for bringing me into this work stream. It's an area of work that I've been passionate about for some time now, and it's absolutely fantastic to be linking with some of the others that are doing fantastic work in this area. So I suppose my main introduction to research in student mental health was from my PhD. My PhD briefly looked to characterise student mental health, and it specifically looked at the impact that university counselling services could have on student mental health outcomes. My PhD was funded by the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, and I've really enjoyed working quite closely with BACP and members throughout my PhD. Shortly after my PhD, towards the end of it, although it wasn't originally planned, it started to take more of a political policy relevant angle. So when I finished my PhD, I did a postdoctoral research position with the policy team at University of Sheffield, where I continued to look at mental health interventions to see how they could have a wider impact on student outcomes, but also looked more broadly at some of the other interventions that we typically have in higher education to see how these new policies coming into HE, how it has an impact on students. Shortly after that, I then ended up joining the BACP research department to continue some of this work, where I still work with a lot of different university counselling services. And I suppose in short, over the years, I've seen that whichever university you work with, whichever student support service you work with, whichever intervention it is, there are so many differences that the universities have had to capture and cater over the years that actually we've now come to a point where if we want to pull data or pull projects or compare and contrast the learnings from different universities, it's actually quite a complex picture. And so this is one of the things that I'm still trying to do with the work that I do at BACP, and also in more recent work, now that I've also recently taken up a place at University of Sheffield, again working on student mental health related work, particularly trying to link up interventions with NHS services. So it's absolutely fantastic to be joining SMaRteN, and I'm looking forward to bring together some of the work already taking place in this area. So Nicola, why do you think we need this type of data now?
Emma, I probably don't need to be telling you that answer. You have done such fantastic work already in this space. I'm really excited to have you on board with this team. I guess from my perspective, looking at this, we know that there's loads of interest in student mental health. I mean, you know that, you've seen that across your work. And over the last 5 years or so, we've had reports from Universities UK, from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, from the Equality Challenge Unit, from the Higher Education Policy Unit, from Student Minds. I think BACP have probably said things along these lines, but lots of organisations all outlining challenges for student mental health. And with all of that noise around the challenges for student mental health, we're seeing increasing pressure on universities to take student mental health seriously. And this is really important. In 2019, the government minister for the Office for Students wrote to university vice chancellors to tell them that they all had to take student mental health seriously and to make it a priority. And I guess right now we're talking via computers because of this coronavirus lockdown, and in this context, the student mental health feels ever more important. But all of this pressure puts universities in a really difficult position. There's pressure to act, and there are real gaps in the research understanding. So there's been many studies showing that X group of students is vulnerable and that Y intervention might work, but it's piecemeal. And in this context, that makes it really hard to know what universities should really be doing. So we don't know whether particular groups of students are more affected than others, and there's no real consensus about why we're seeing high levels of mental distress being reported. People have sort of suggested that it might be debt, it might be bullying, online or otherwise. Sexual violence has been suggested to be a problem on university campuses. Social media is often blamed. We're worried that students are lonely. There's concern that students might be relabeling everyday emotional problems. Perhaps there have been changes in parenting styles. Is there increased exam stress, pressure to achieve high grades? We've got rising numbers of students and perhaps a broader cohort of students at universities, and that might have an effect. Perhaps the pressure and the concerns about future employability are also at the front of students' minds. I guess with all that in mind, it's really difficult. If you gave vice chancellors a direct instruction to invest £1 million in student mental health, there's no clear consensus about how best they should spend that money. And so I guess from SMaRteN's perspective, what we'd really like to try and help with is to try and pull together better data. So Emma, I guess I'm really excited to have you on board, because just listening to that list of projects that you're working on and the experience you've got, I know you're aware of lots of different pockets of work that are going on that are trying to achieve this sort of better data map for us. Can I get you to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose one of the main projects I'm working on at the minute across my BACP and my Sheffield role is the SCORE project, which is a consortium of universities. So SCORE stands for Student Counselling Outcomes Research and Evaluation. And I suppose, in short, this is a group of academics and practitioners working in counselling services, trying to better understand student outcomes following counselling and how we can better use data that's already being collected by services to inform the development of services that are more diverse and that are more open. But also beyond the intervention, we need to be informing policy decisions. So it very much needs to be driven by data, and not just any data. It needs to be driven by good quality, robust data that we can trust, that's representative of the whole student population. So some of the things that we've picked up on in SCORE, but even back to my PhD, as I've been working with a number of universities for quite some time now, is that there are a lot of data inconsistencies. And now universities or the services within them aren't to blame for those inconsistencies, because you do have different types of students going to universities in different areas, and they have different needs. We know that students from different faculties, for example, engineering compared to arts and humanities, they tend to have different needs and different preferences, and so there will be different interventions and different experiences that students from these different backgrounds have. So I suppose bringing that back down to data, one of the things that we've really picked up on in SCORE, and even anecdotally when I'm speaking to other universities and support services, demographic information is collected quite differently across different services, which some of you might not find surprising. Personally, I did find it quite surprising, because my research tends to focus more so on the measures. So if we can use a validated, bona fide well-being measure or mental health measure or outcome or academic measure, whatever it is you want to measure, as long as we can encourage people to use validated measures, then surely that's the hardest part of the issue, isn't it? But actually, that's not what we're finding. What we're finding is that it's the other data that's also really messy. So whether you look at demographic information, whether you look at what a university will count as a protector or a vulnerable characteristic for a student, are universities interested in looking at care leavers or students who are parents or people who are estranged from their family? We also have issues when we look at the developmental transitions. So universities will often only have access to the data at which students are with them for, but we need data before they go to university, during university, and Nicola, you already mentioned a bit about employability there, but we also need after. And so what we find is that it's so resource intensive, time and money and funding intensive to research any area of student mental health that actually we are restricted to the types of data that we have access to. And so one of the other projects that we're working on at Sheffield and with the other White Rose universities is that we've started to develop our own wellbeing cohort. So this is absolutely some of the work that we hope to bring into the SMaRteN work with the larger national picture of linking up these different longitudinal studies. But we've absolutely recognised this with some of the White Rose projects, where one of the important things of data is having that baseline, and that baseline isn't when they get to university, it's before university. And so I think if we can have more linking up of projects across universities and across different data sets and different data that's being collected across different measures, then we can absolutely get a more representative picture to understand what's going on. And ultimately, that type of rich data can help us make informed decisions about policies and guidelines and interventions that do lead to good outcomes for students.
Emma, that's you're picking up so many different points there that are difficult and challenging. So I guess I hadn't really thought of that either, about the demographic data. And then you're also picking up that point about the time we need with baseline to start. That needs to be earlier than it's often being done. And does it really matter for us to be able to link across different universities? Perhaps you just draw a line and you say it's okay, every university can collect their own data. We don't need this all together. So given the challenges of pulling this work together, what do we really gain in understanding by linking data from multiple universities?
Absolutely. So I think there are two things going on there, actually. I think it is important for universities to be able to collect data that's relevant to their unique context. However, I think they should be able to do so whilst being part of a national picture. So I don't think it's about standardising every type of data that any university collects. I think it's about the sector coming together to agree on a minimum data set. So this is a minimum requirement where we come together and we agree that if we are going to collect pre-entry data, what pre-entry data should we be looking at that we know will inform the development of interventions or preventative strategies that are known to have an impact on student mental health. And so I think it's about promoting choice about what universities collect in order to develop their own institutional uniqueness, but it's also about that being part of a national sort of minimum data set. And so to answer your question, why do we need to be linking this data? And I think you touched on it a little bit at the start. I think one of the most important things that we can learn from linking data from different universities is that naturally that data can generate larger sample sizes of marginalised student groups that we wouldn't usually see in an independent university or even a service within that university. So here we're talking about postgraduate students or students from ethnic minority backgrounds or LGBTQ plus individuals, part-time students, all types of unique groups that we know don't typically present to support services, whether we're talking about counselling services or a wellbeing service or even personal tutoring. Part of my policy work with University of Sheffield, we looked at the impact that personal tutors have on empowering students from BAME backgrounds to feel entitled to seek help for academic support and support for their mental health. And what we find is that there are subgroups of students that we don't typically see either feeling empowered to seek help or look at a service, and they might not see that that service speaks to them in terms of their unique needs. And so if we only looked at one institution or one service within an institution, those students are so few that we can't look at them either from an ethical reason because there's risk of identifying them, or there's so few of them that we can't meaningfully extrapolate any findings from that. And so if we link up data sets across different universities, then we start to generate larger samples. And actually in the pilot work that we've done with the SCORE project, we're already starting to see that. So by only working with 4 universities, so we're working with 6, but we've been able to pull data from 4. And just in those 4 universities, we're already seeing larger numbers of international students, larger numbers of male students, larger medics, larger postgraduate students, students who disclose disability. So just in that pilot work of 4 universities, we can really see the benefit of linking up this data. And I think if we added that with the longitudinal work, then it's bringing in that full developmental transition, not only what's happening to students before they come to university and what pre-existing experiences they might be bringing with them, but also it's that gap after university as well. It's following up with students beyond just 6 months after graduation, because I think ultimately students are a unique population, but however, they will contribute to society once they leave university and join the workforce. And so whatever happens to them during university, how well or poorly their mental health or their well-being may change throughout university, they're ultimately going to be members of society. And I think this is a responsibility of not only the HE sector, but the wider society to really take student mental health seriously.
Okay. And Emma, I'm just thinking there that you've also, so I guess a key point in what you're saying there is about minority groups and making sure that, I guess it's an equality issue that we're missing if we're not pulling data sets together. And I'm also thinking about your experience of the policy work. Is there something that we gain in linking universities together? Can you start to make comparisons around policy decisions? Is that a feasible final objective, or is that really just far too far off down the line?
I mean, I think that would be the ideal goal, really, because it's important for policy decisions to be driven by robust evidence. It's fantastic to have surveys and working groups and focus groups in this area, but ultimately, if policy decisions are making a change on the types of interventions that are going to be made available for students, or even down to how the curriculum is designed to perhaps be more friendly for students' mental health. These are decisions that do come from the top, and if we don't have the data that's representative, if we don't have data that's robust, then people are going to be trying to make decisions that aren't fully informed, because we're not currently accurately capturing the full diversity of our student population.
Emma, I think you've put forward a pretty convincing case for why we ought to do this. What am I missing? Why are we not doing it already? Why is this work already? I mean, can we not just link this all together and just move forward? What are the challenges here?
I think absolutely. So I think there is fantastic work being done in this area. I think different universities have different access to funding. They have different priorities to inform their own services. And so I think there are many examples of really good work going on in this area, but it's often, even if they're collaborating, so I mentioned earlier with the White Rose Group, it's really great for us to be working with different universities, but that's only universities within the White Rose Group. So I think there's a real benefit for linking with different universities, because that's where we can really recognise and understand best practice. So yes, universities are different, but if we can learn how something works well in one university, then rather than doing that same work or repeating that work or having to split those resources to do something that's already been done, if we worked together and brought in good practice, if we had challenges for collecting data or engaging with students or bringing in senior level buy-in to allow us to do student mental health work with our students, then if we can learn best practice and recognise case studies of where this has worked well, but equally where has it not worked well, we need to be it's very important to be linking with our student unions and make sure that students are very much part of this research rather than the research having been done to them. And there are some universities that already have fantastic examples of how they do co-create work with their students, and so I think it's about pooling together, pooling resources and learning what's already been done and what's worked elsewhere.
Emma, that's really, really interesting. Thank you. And so what do you think the next steps are for SMaRteN? How do we help here?
So I think the next step is having that initial discussion. It's bringing together the people already working on particularly longitudinal studies at the minute, whether they're new, whether they're only just setting up, or whether they're established and they've been working for a couple of years now. I think the first stage is to have that initial conversation. And so this is one of the things that we're hoping to get out of the event that we're running on the 30th of June, which is a virtual sort of discussion being held by trying to bring together anyone working on longitudinal studies at the minute that are trying to capture the full developmental transitions of students. We're bringing everyone together in one virtual room to really understand what they're already doing, what they're struggling with, identify those areas of best practice, and as a group come together and see where we can take this forward.
Thank you, Emma, so much for your time. I'm looking forward to the 30th of June. I think that should be super exciting. Thank you.
Absolutely.